Well, thank you, everybody, for coming out this morning and braving the cold weather to come enjoy our Tread Talk this morning. That means an awful lot to us. There's just some people I'd like to recognize and thank for coming over. And first, I want to thank the German Car Club of Kansas for such a wonderful turnout today. If you're here, can you hold up your hand? And let's thank all those folks from traveling in. We also have a lot of these folks volunteer at the Garage Museum over in Salina, and we've got some other docents and stuff here, so we want to recognize them. And if you haven't had a chance to go to the Garage Museum, please do. It's a beautiful museum. We enjoy working with them and sharing cars, and so please check their museum out. I also want to recognize Rich and Rebecca Bonebrake up here in the front. Rich and his wife brought over their 2012 Mercedes Gullwing this morning, drove it all the way over from Topeka. So that's pretty special. So you folks could enjoy it, and I'm sure Rich and Rebecca will be glad to visit with you about it afterwards and show you some of the fun things about that. Rich and Rebecca also own a 1954 Mercedes Gullwing number 4. That was his dad's car. For some reason, he wouldn't bring that out today and the stuff, but maybe one of these days, Rich, I'm going to talk you into letting us borrow that. But anyway, an amazing car. They've got some beautiful cars, so thank you both very much for coming here today and bringing your car. But with that, I do want to welcome Ann Palmer. Many of you know Ann. She's no stranger to many of us. She's done a number of our Tread Talks on a regular basis. To say she's passionate about cars would be an understatement. She loves cars, all different types of cars. She loves performance cars. But I think the thing she's really most passionate about is the design and the style and the beauty behind the cars.
Right. I don't know much about engines.
She doesn't know much about engines, but she loves doing the research to find out the history of the cars. When we got the Gullwing, she said, I want to do that Tread Talk if we need somebody. I said, you tag, you're it. So we'll see what she has for us this morning. But Ann's a landscape architect by profession. She's also a professional photographer. In addition to her passion for cars, so she has her fingers in a lot of different things. Her and her husband, Jerry, and Jerry's up here in the front row. Jerry's an attorney in Topeka. So we appreciate their coming over this morning. But anyway, Ann's going to share with us today the history of our Mercedes Benz Gullwing and the story behind Mercedes itself. So I'm going to shut up and turn it over to Ann and let her visit with you. So let's give her a warm welcome.
Well, thank you, Doug. This has been one of the joys of my life. I came on 3 weeks before it opened. It'll be 6 years in April. And my other two group members here know it's so much fun. And while we each have our own areas of I hate to say experience, but special car or special years. There are no fights. Everybody gets along smoothly. But when we first started, and we started talking about buying cars, everyone was in agreement about the Gullwing Mercedes. Everyone. And we were so excited when we got one. So with that, thank you also for coming. And I have to tell you, I am mildly terrified that there are so many Mercedes people in the audience. I am not a Mercedes person. I am an admirer of Mercedes cars. And the extent of my knowledge was to know about the cars, just what they look like, and to know that I have never known a more loyal brand group of people. People who buy Mercedes always buy Mercedes, and I found that impressive. But that was it. That was the extent of my knowledge and my incredible admiration for the Gullwing. So I went into this, which kind of tabula rasa, not knowing anything about the history, and I have found it fascinating. I've gone down a bunch of rabbit holes. I have all these notes, which is far too many notes because I got so interested in all the ins and outs of the company and the names. And so please forgive any mistakes and tell me afterwards where my mistakes were. But it has been a joy. And while my husband won't want to hear this, but while I have never owned a Mercedes and never thought that I would, Now I'm not as sure. Yeah, my husband does not share my passion for cars. We'll leave it at that. But he's very supportive. All right, let me. Oh, well, I drive my work car as a Lexus SUV, but I have an '08 Z4 that I have had a number of years. And it looks, thank you. Rebecca said it looks good on me. So I do enjoy it a lot. And my grandchildren have enjoyed it a lot. And they are very interested in who's going to get it. And I've not said. So to begin, the first name that I discovered when I started doing all the research was Gottlieb Daimler. He was essentially the founder of what became Mercedes. He was a German engineer, an industrial designer, and he was a pioneer of the internal combustion engine and automobile development. He invented the high-speed liquid petroleum-fueled engine, which makes him pretty early and pretty important. Prior to this, I'm embarrassed to say that I just sort of thought Henry Ford had done the first cars. And with all my interest in cars, I am really embarrassed to say that. The Germans were so far ahead, so far ahead. All right, this is Mr. Daimler in one of their early automobiles, but they were automobiles. Now, those of you in the group probably recognize Carl Benz, B-E-N-Z. They were not yet, they did not merge until 1926, and I'll get to that later. But Carl Benz was a very bright engineer, and by training, and an inventor. And he had the luck and good sense to marry a woman named Bertha Benz, her married name. She came from a wealthy family. She desperately wanted to go to the engineering college there in Germany in the 1870s, but they would not have her. So that may have been what attracted her to Carl. And they became partners in his fledgling automobile business. And he was very poor. And to have a little bit of money, he had joined with a bicycle company to get started. But Bertha brought money to the operation, and she brought brains. And this is very important in Bertha's story. And her story apparently did not become really public till the early part of the 21st century. She was a partner, as I said, with Carl, but Carl had designed this motor wagon. It was called the Benz Patent Motor Wagon. It was being produced, but no one knew about it, and he was a little bit shy, and she thought he wasn't marketing it correctly. So one morning, she took her two sons, age 15 and 13. She told people she was going to visit her mother, and she did not tell her husband anything. And she and the two boys went 65 miles in this vehicle. Prior to that, cars had been tested in very short drives, going very short distances. The roads were not roads. They were ruts in 1888 in this part of Germany. They stopped every once in a while at what they called chemists, which we would call pharmacies, to get the petrol for the car. Partway there, the wooden brakes began to wear out, so she stopped at a cobbler's store, or it wouldn't have been a store then, cobbler's shop, and got a leather to put on the brakes, which of course became the first brake pads. She had a jam in an oil tube, which she cleared with a hat pin, and By the end of the day, they had made it to the town where her mother lived, and she sent a telegram to Carl to tell him about the trip. And this became legendary because it was the longest, at that time, trip taken by an automobile. And I think she's gotten a lot more publicity in the last few years. This was Carl Benz's factory from, as you see, 1886 to 1920, which was large and efficient and did extremely well. It's 1901, and this was a race in Nice. And I don't know who the driver is, but one of the Rothschilds was the passenger. And this was a Benz vehicle. It's kind of interesting when, for example, Chevrolet in 1953 made the sports car, the Corvette. It was said that they were in about as good a position to design a sports car as a Caterpillar tractor company would have been. That is not true of Benz and Daimler. They had been into racing as early as 1901. This man, who you may or may not have heard of, is terribly important to what happened and what became Mercedes Benz. This man's name is Emil Jelinek, and he was essentially a salesman. And he was very interested in automobiles, and he was very wealthy. And so he approached Gottlieb Daimler and said that he wanted 36 of his racing automobiles. Now, this was in 1902. And he offered a tremendous price, more money than Daimler could imagine, and they desperately needed money. And for that, Mr. Jelinek wanted to be the exclusive agent for the cars, for all of these DMG, as they were called then, cars, in all of Europe and the United States. But that was a lot to ask, but it was a lot of money. And he had one more qualification, and that was that the cars be named for his 10-year-old daughter, Mercedes. And now, you all probably know that, but that was shocking to me. I just supposed Mercedes was the name of the founder. The other thing that I found interesting, and I called Dan Minnick and talked to him, and I had found one sentence, and then later found even a paragraph. And they refer to the DMG, which was Daimler's cars, clear up until the 20s, yet they also refer to Mercedes. And the cars were named Mercedes, but the name of the company did not change. So I thought that was really interesting. So he became quite the entrepreneur and changed his name later with a hyphen to include Mercedes in it. So he was quite an individual. This was his daughter, Mercedes. Where I'm starting now, I tried to decide how I would get to the Gullwings. And so what I've done is talk about the foundation for these racing cars and for the beautiful Gullwing Mercedes. And so I'm talking a lot about the racing history of Mercedes. And this was a Mercedes Simplex. And this one, another Mercedes Simplex, that they raced in 1903, and it had 90 horsepower. And I'm not sure exactly how fast it went. I think maybe 60 miles an hour, but this is 1903. I mean, the streets of Dearborn, Michigan were scarcely filled with racing automobiles at that time. Sort of the next generation was this, let me get the right name, 1923 Tropfenwagen, which means teardrop shape. And this was done after World War I. Between, the World War I was much longer in Europe than in the United States. So from about 1914 through the war ended in 1918, German factories just shut down and made equipment for the war. So they lost, the Mercedes lost a lot of money during those years, but they started back with this car. In 1921, there were talks between Carl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler about merging. Things were really bad in Germany at that time. With the Versailles Treaty, which let Ford Motor Company sell cars in Germany, and the general rate of inflation, and money was tough, and times were tough. And so they talked about merging, but it didn't work. They couldn't come to terms. But by 1926, it was much worse. And so they did come to terms. And I love this. And I love it so much I made a photograph print of it. That is the official poster of the merger of Mercedes and Benz. And in that, it's interesting that you see Mercedes referred to as though it were a company name. Mr. Daimler, before he formally got into cars, had designed airplanes, boats, and automobiles. And it is believed that the Tri-Star, which you will still see everywhere today, is based on land, sea, and air. The laurel wreath that the model is holding was the symbol of Carl Benz's automobiles. And you can see that, and you can see the two circa 1926 automobiles. I think that's really neat. I'd love to have a poster of that. This is, I think, for all car people, interesting. While Maybach had been an early partner and very close friend of Daimler, they hired, and where the name came from, I'm not sure, but they hired Ferdinand Porsche to work for the Daimler company. And these were racing cars that Porsche designed for Daimler in 1926, called Sicily Red. And this is the fascinating part, which actually makes me a little anxious. One of his, Mr. Porsche's, inventions in these cars was that he put mercury in the exhaust valves to dissipate the temperature. I'm not sure putting mercury anywhere is a good idea, but apparently it worked. I loved this poster. This is a series of transitions of the Mercedes badge up through the present time. I had always said in various talks, it was my impression that the one that you see from 33 on, I just assumed it had always been. I did not know it had gone through these other transitions. Then we get into a little more serious racing and a little more serious looks. This is the 1929 SSK of the now combined Mercedes Benz. And it was quite a racing automobile. And this one was the 1934 SSK, which got accolades from everyone, and the Silver Arrow Mercedes, which I'm going to show you W25, W125, and W154. And why they designated the cars that way, I'm not quite sure, but they did. So there's this one, these were all pre-war, pre-World War II automobiles. And this one particularly was the W165, the little car that could. This is the car that in 1939 was the last racing car before the war. And there were I think there were 6 of these made. This was the height prior to World War II of Mercedes Benz racing automobiles. This is their factory, one of their major factories prior to the war. This is not that factory, but it could have been. It's what they lost every single factory that Mercedes had, which I had not realized. And they had to, during the war, stop all production and turn over everything to making basically trucks for the military. And it was a very, as we all could imagine, a very difficult time. From everything I had read and studied getting ready for this, they were not nearly as close to the Third Reich as some of the other German car manufacturers, but they did what they had to do. They lost 2,500 employees during the war who were killed and 86 that were never found. This was 1955, the same factory, which was, of course, completely restored and thriving. The thing that I have come away with admiration for the company was that immediately after the war, and you've seen the destruction, and you know what the destruction was like in World War II, immediately after that, they had nothing. They had saved money, however, and at pre-World War II, their German mark was worth $4 American. At the end of the war, with all the factories gone, the money was worth 67 cents against the American dollar. They were in terrible straits. And in this country, we did not start making cars again really seriously until the year 48. There were some 46 and 47s, but not many. So Max Hoffman, who is an interesting character in himself, this is his famous Frank Lloyd Wright designed showroom on Fifth Avenue in New York in the 50s. I realized I did not know, Frank Lloyd Wright is another favorite of mine, that he also designed Max Hoffman's home. So Max Hoffman had been an Austrian, and he was Jewish, and he fled Europe in the 30s and became a very wealthy man. And he was really the first importer of European cars to sell to Americans on a kind of big-time basis. So he went to Mercedes Benz in the late 40s and said, there's a market for race cars in this country, and there's a market for sports cars, and I want you to design a sports car that I can sell. And so they did, and by 52, they had the car that preceded the 300 SLs, or the Gullwings, and it was made in 52 and had very much the same body, the same style, and it was what Max Hoffman started selling then, in 52. And I want you to think for a minute, it's not very long from 46 to 52. And to go from the destruction that you saw and the no money and the post-war problems to have produced these gems, which have held their value and their beauty all these years, that long after the war, I think is nothing short of miraculous. And so, in addition to our beauty here, which Doug is going to talk about a little more in detail, I just took some other pictures. And this one was as close as I could find to ours. Ours was this color in its origin. And I forget what Doug calls this color, but I call it French cream. It reminds me of vanilla, French vanilla. And we are so proud of it and so excited to have it. Sterling Moss in 1958 drove this version of racing car. Then, this I just took off the internet, but we have right here, which is, they made from 2010 to 2014, the SLS AMG. And this is what Rich and Rebecca have been nice enough to bring to show us. I call these cars an homage to the Gullwings from 54 to 57. They have such common genetic characteristics and so beautiful. And there is another few of those. Now we get to one of my favorite parts of the story. And I'm going to read you what Rich and Rebecca have put together. And this is in Rich's words. I am the proud owner of 300 SL number 4, which was built, shipped, and arrived in the United States alongside 300 SL number 3 on August 23, 1954. In 2016, we began a nuts and bolt restoration by expert restorer Chris Olson of Chetik, Wisconsin, with the mission to roll back 60 years of road and race use to return number 4 to as shipped, historically accurate condition. With project completion, we showed number 4 at the Amelia Island Pebble Beach Drain in 2023. We had previously shown the rolling chassis at the Lake Geneva Convention in 2019, and I have that picture. Details of the early history of 300 SL number 4 are being continually assembled. My father, Case Bonebreak, and those of you from Manhattan know him because he was a mechanical engineer in charge of all the buildings at K-State, and quite well known and beloved, and also as a serious car person. He had acquired number 4 in 1961 from LL, or Peanuts, Lacer, which I've now learned is a pretty famous man when I've mentioned it in this area, of Junction City, Kansas. Peanuts Lacer had acquired number 4 from George Stevens, Jr., who was a Hollywood director, I believe, who was transferring from California to Washington, D.C. Number 4 arrived in Salina, Kansas by train and was then driven to Junction City by one of Peanut's sons, where at some time the car died and it wouldn't run. My father acquired number 4 for $1,000 to $2,000, a 48 Chevy rust bucket, a loaf of bread in the back seat, and my paper route bicycle. Quite a combination. Lacer parted with the car because he could just not get to it he was not an average mechanic, as he had well over 100 cars to care for, including a Silver Ghost Rolls-Royce, a Delahaye, Bentleys, and other Mercedes. The Mercedes dealer in Kansas City was also at a loss to fix it. So Peanuts was convinced to find someone who could get the car running. Case was a mechanical engineer and a friend who was confident he could bring the beast to life. And for less than $1 for a new diaphragm, he had the car running like new. Number 4 became his daily driver and was also his national time, distance, speed rally car. Now we come to this photograph. Tom Burriston described Case's unique parking place at a Kansas State University Anderson Hall administration building in an article in the Star newsletter in August of 2020. A VW Beetle could get into the space, probably hoping to make that their parking place, but one could not open the door wide enough to get out of the car. So the doors of the Gullwing, however, allowed an easy exit. So this is in a niche in Anderson. Number 4 Gullwing was hand-built alongside number 3 Gullwing, which together were the first production 300 SL coupes to be completed and shipped from the factory. Number 4 is largely hand-built, has very few vendor-supplied components, and remains all original primary assemblies and elements specified in the build sheet. Unique details compared all other production 300 SLs are too numerous to list, but a few include asymmetrical side vents and doors. The car is an inch shorter than all other Gullwings. The driver's side tail lamp is 2 centimeters lower than the right. Side vent trim is aluminum with T-bolts, but still are able to be moved with awkward entry. Note that Rock Hudson getting into number 4 at the Hollywood introduction of the 300 SL. The wheels and dashboard do not match the exterior color, as the factory seemed to be in a hurry to paint the color its first owner, Carl Kiefhofer, requested. The hood, trunk, doors, and rocker panels are all stamped 3. The belly pans are a unique form, unlike other Gullwings. The roof vents are cut square, not oval. There were 15 Gullwings made before 1 and 2. I acquired number 4 from my father in 1993. The Beast ruptured another fuel pump diaphragm in 2016, which prompted my search for someone to do a correct restoration. John Olson, previous editor of the SL Market newsletter, recommended without hesitation Chris Olson. Because this Gullwing featured dozens of styling and engineering elements not continued in the subsequent 300 SLs, necessitating a meticulous effort to preserve history. I have a letter from the original owner, Carl Kiefhofer, addressed to my father in December of 1963. One of Mr. Kiefhofer's statements was that he often regretted disposing of number 4 because of its fine transmission, which had a good feel and a good solid floor shift. These items were changed on later models for some reason unknown to me, but nevertheless to the detriment of the car. The exclamation is my editorial comment. Now, we get to the end and my very favorite part of this story. And this is Rich, remember, speaking, and I know his age and mine. I'm a little bit older, and he was probably in high school when this happened. One of my most memorable experiences in the car was in the early 1960s, and my dad was driving out to his family farm in western Kansas, going along Old Highway 24, proceeding expeditiously, nice word, from grain elevator filling station combination to the next. It was dark, and I happened to look behind, and saw flashing red lights getting smaller. I told Dad, and he pulled into the next filling station for a soda. Moments later, at least 2 police cars pulled up with blinding, flashing lights and deafening sirens wailing. An officer told us there was a roadblock a mile down the road, and if we got to it, we were going to jail. He also stated that he was not going to give us a ticket because he knew no judge would believe how fast he thought we were going. And they were flying over 110 miles an hour. We commenced our trip at a much more modest speed after graciously informing the officers about the wonders of the Gullwing. I thought that is priceless. So, questions. This is the parking place. This is when they were at Lake Geneva. And I didn't know what they were. I had seen this picture before I saw what you were doing, and I was completely baffled.
Interestingly, you can't tell, but the welds on the driver's side.
Here.
The welds on the chassis on the driver's side are all smooth, no wrinkles. On the passenger side, they're wrinkled. They're solid, but they're wrinkled. The screws on the driver's side are Phillips. The screws on the passenger side are all slotted horizontal. Just 2 more differences.
Thanks. Questions?
So then, which one is this one in terms of number, the breakdown?
This is a 1957. In fact, Doug is going to show you some things about this vehicle. But it's a 1957. But from 54, 55, 56, 57, they are essentially the same car. There were some minor changes, but there were 1,400 of them produced. Then they started making the Roadster the next year, and there were about 1,800 of those made.
Why the Gullwing?
See, the chassis is a tubular space frame, and the chassis on that 52 went up to the window line. So they had to make a modification. They lowered it, 8 inches so that you could get in. We had a picture of Rock Hudson trying to get in, and he loosened one of those chrome bars over the wheel vent by kicking, trying to get in. He's about 6'4", 6'5", kind of an awkward entrance.
Well, and apparently for race car drivers, it was much faster, and they could kind of dive in and out of it. So, good question. Other questions?
Let's give Ann a warm thank you.
It was my, it's not the mic. It was my pleasure.
Thank you, Ann. This car, just tell you a little bit about it. The museum's owned about 1.5 years. Like Ann said, we'd always wanted a Mercedes Gullwing, and had kind of been keeping our eye out for one. A number of them had come up. Just the timing wasn't always right, or the dollars weren't right. I have a friend from Sotheby's that reached out to me about 1.5 years ago and says, Doug, I think I found a Gullwing for you. It's out in Los Angeles. It's a charcoal gray with the red leather interior. I said, oh, that sounds great. And he told me what he wanted for it. I said, well, that's a little high, but let's, we can look at it. And I called our benefactor, Ward and Brenda, and they said, yeah, go check it out. And well, long story short, the guy ended up selling it to a friend of his, and it never went up for sale, so that we lost out on that one. So the guy that told me about it kind of felt bad about it, so I said, well, I found another one for you. It's at the Scott Grunfer Company. Scott Grunfer is kind of the West Coast specialist on these cars. They repair them both mechanically and bodies, kind of the go-to people. And this car was at the Scott Grunfer Company. It was a silver one, which a lot of them were silver. And we looked at some pictures of it. We knew it had some issues, but it didn't look too bad. So a group of us flew out to L.A. and up to where the car was to check it out. And it was a little rougher than what we thought. But the amazing thing was the Scott Grunford Company, there were about 5 or 6 of these Gullwings that were there being worked on. And interestingly enough, one of them was that dark gray one that we were trying to buy a month before. It was there getting serviced. And so we got to look at it, and he said, I told that guy you were coming, that you were the one that you were interested in. He said, well, if you guys want to buy it, he'd be interested in flipping it for $100,000 more than what he just paid for it. So I said, well, we'll take a pass on that. I'm not going to do that, play that game. But so we looked at some other cars that they had. They all need a little work. This one was around the corner, tucked next to a Roadster. And so I thought it was a Roadster at first, so I hadn't paid too much attention right away. And I got looking at it, I thought, that's kind of a unique color. And like Ann said, this car, when it was built in 1957, was what they called white gray. And that's the only thing that's changed on this car. The red leather interior is original to the car, but it was repainted this ivory color in 1993. So it's a little different color than it was born with. It's correct Mercedes color, but it originally was born white gray. Anyway, we saw this car there, and I thought, what a striking color combination. If I look for cars for a museum, I like interesting cars with stories. Also, what's going to pop on the floor, what's going to really look amazing that people are going to want to gravitate towards. So that color really appealed to me. So we started talking. We said, well, it's not currently for sale. It's here being serviced. The guy that owns it's in New Jersey. He's in his 80s. I said, well, do you think he'd be interested in selling it? He said, well, I can call him and find out. So he did. And long story short, the guy decided, yes, he'd sell it to the right place. He liked it going to a museum. We worked out a price, and about an hour and a half later, it was our museum's. So when I told Ward about it and showed pictures of it to Ward goes, that's pretty cool. He says, we might repaint it. He wasn't too cool on the color. I said, Ward, you're not going to touch that color. I said, it's a gorgeous color. People are going to love it. He liked that gray color, kind of the color of yours, Rich. And so I think he's warming up to it now. He likes the color now a little bit better than he did. But I think it's striking. I know a lot of us do. But that was kind of a little funny thing on sidekick on it. But this is a 1957. This was the least production year. I think they made around 100, and Rich, you can correct me, 160-something in 1954, about 800 and something in 55, then back down to 300 something in 1956. Only 70 of them in 1957, because that was just a partial year. So they were switching over to the Roadster, which was the soft-top convertible version. So they made them for about 4 or 5 months. This is number 53 of those 70. This still maintains its original matching numbers: chassis, engine, transmission, everything original to the car, including the original toolkit. One thing that's changed is the color of the car was changed from its original color. But I'd invite you to come up. I'm going to start it up for you. It is an interesting process to start it up. You have to turn on the electric fuel pump, let it run for about 10 or 15 seconds. Then there's a choke knob you pull out, and you have to hold that out, and a little white light will come on. Then you turn the ignition key until it starts. Once it starts, you leave the choke pulled out until a little red light that's on the other side of the steering column goes out. That means it's idling at the correct idle. Then you can release the choke and see if it'll keep running. If it starts to stall out, you have to pull the choke back out and give it a little more choke. But once the car is warmed up, it runs very smoothly. But when you first start it for the first time, in a couple of days, it's a little rough for about a minute until it smooths out. But amazing car. Amazing thing on the dashboard, you look in there, none of the gauges or none of the switches and stuff are labeled. And I found out that Mercedes didn't think that was necessary. They thought it kind of cluttered the dash. They liked the clean appearance. They said if people owned the car, they had the owner's manual, they could figure it out and they would know it. So it's pretty basic. I mean, there's no air conditioning in this car. When we took delivery of this car, it was, I kid you not, Manhattan had the hottest temperature in the United States that day, 118 degrees. This car was delivered in the back parking lot. It had been in an enclosed car trailer for 2 days. When we pulled that car out and got in it, I thought we were going to catch on fire. I mean, it was so hot. And no air conditioning. The windows do not roll down in these cars. You can take the windows out, but it's a little bit of a process, but there's no roll-down windows. So it was a beast to get in that car in that hot weather. But we wanted to drive it so bad we did. We all took turns driving around the back parking lot. But then a couple months later, once Nick, our mechanic, went through it and got some things worked out, we took it out to the airport, and everybody on our board and staff that wanted to got to take it and drive it around out there for a little bit, which was a lot of fun. And we've had it out once or twice since then. So fun car. I'm going to pop the hood, and then we'll fire it up.